Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, guys, whether you're watching us on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook, and I apologize for this delay. And today I'm joined by Dr. Zachary Foster. He's coming to us from an airport. This is the first time that I host a guest from an airport. Everything it has a first time, you know. Zachary Foster, Dr. Zachary Foster, he earned his PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University. Currently, he serves as a fellow at the Rutgers Center for Security, Race, and Rights. Foster manages a digital archive known as Palestine Nexus and authors a newsletter titled Palestine in Your Inbox. As a Jewish American historian specializing in Palestine, he was a former Zionist before delving into the study of Palestine. Dr. Foster, all the links of your X and also the blog, the website are in the description below. Guys, you can subscribe to his website and receive all these newsletters. Dr. Zachary, if I may start this conversation with you, I wanted to host you because Mr. Yuval Noah Harari, he published an article with the title, Will Zionism Survive the War? And I saw that you have published a thread trying to counter the arguments of Harari in this article. But before we dive into the details of Harari's article, what is your definition of Zionism in 2024? Especially with the ongoing onslaught against the Palestinians in Gaza, and how Zionism is different today from what the founding fathers envisioned 150 years ago?
So Zionism was a historical movement that said that we should establish a Jewish state in Palestine, in a land that is 70, 80, 90% non-Jewish. That was the gist of the Zionist enterprise. It was a group of European Jews, both in Eastern and Western Europe, and they came to the belief that that anti-Semitism would persist forever, and the solution to the problem of anti-Semitism was to establish a Jewish state in a land that was 90% non-Jewish. And so today I would say that that ideology is more or less the same as it was 100 years ago. I don't think it has changed a whole lot. The idea is we believe there should be a Jewish state in Palestine, in Israel. That is more or less the same ideology today as it was 140 years ago.
And but the tools for establishing the state, was it also from the beginning when they envisioned the creation of Israel, was it all based on removing the indigenous people, or there was some sort of an idea of coexistence with the Palestinians there?
So there were different approaches within the Zionist movement. I would say that the most naive approach was this belief that the native inhabitants of Palestine, the primarily Muslim and Christian, as well as Jewish, by the way, inhabitants of Palestine, that they would accept political subjugation owing to the benefits that Zionism would bring to them, especially the economic benefits, the Zionist investment, the Zionist ingenuity, that the native inhabitants would benefit so much so that they would accept political domination. They would accept that a state whose purpose was to serve the needs and the interests of the Jewish people that they would accept that reality in Palestine. There was a second approach that said, we realize that the natives have a strong attachment to the country, that they've been living here for many, many centuries, if not millennia. They have no desire to be subjugated, but we can bribe them, which is what the Zionists did, right? They bribed the editors of every major newspaper in Palestine from the 1910s to the 1940s. They bribed Balu Shahada, the editor of Mir'at al-Sharq. They bribed the editors of Palestine, the Isa al-Isa cousins. They gave subventions to Palestinian Arabs to issue declarations of support to Zionism. So they were aware that the Zionists were not they were aware that the Palestinian Arabs were not going to accept subjugation but they believed with enough money, with the right incentives, they could compel them to accept it. And then there was a third approach, which I think by the late 1930s, especially after the Great Arab Revolt from 36 to 39, this third approach, I think, came to dominate the mainstream opinion of every major Zionist leader. And that approach said, the Palestinian Arabs, they have deep roots in the country. They have a strong national identity, and they will resist any attempt to establish a Jewish state in their country, and in a Muslim country, in an Arab country. And I would say the reason that approach became especially dominant after 36 was because it was obvious the Palestinian Arabs, after that revolt, had no intention of submitting, had no intention of becoming second-class citizens in their own homeland. And so you have every major Zionist leader, beginning with Theodor Herzl in the 1890s, going on down to Moshe Chertok, to David Ben-Gurion, every single Arthur Rupin, obviously Ze'ev Jabotinsky. There's not a single important Zionist leader who didn't ask themselves the question: how do we establish a Jewish state in a land that is 70, 80, 90% non-Jewish? And by the 40s, they all landed on the same question: transfer. That was which today we would, this was known as transfer in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Today we have a better term for it. It's called ethnic cleansing.
You know what's the bad news for the Israeli government nowadays? That their enemy is the Palestinian people. They are very resilient and very, I would say, for decades, they have been resisting under different names, under different banners. And every time they form a resistance group, they're called the terrorists, whether it's left-wing, whether it's centrist group, whether it's right-wing group, whether it's Islamist, whether it's a socialist. Every resistant group has been formed against the Israeli side was deemed or called as terrorists by the Israeli side. Today's live streaming was mostly about this opinion article published by Yuval Noah Harari, Will Zionism Survive the War? And I summarized this article. I would like to read to the audience the summary of this article. The author starts the article by: Israel's 76th anniversary is being questioned as the term Zionism is distorted and weaponized, with some groups claiming it is a form of tribalism or racism. Zionism, a national movement originating in the late 19th century, argues that Jews constitute a nation and have the right to self-determination. This idea doesn't imply superiority to other peoples such as Greeks, Poles, or Palestinians. The accusation of Zionism with racism is false and tainted with racism. Proscribing Zionism implies that Jews cannot have legitimate national aspirations, unlike all other people. However, some Zionists can be racists or bigots, as relations between nations are often fraught with tensions and atrocities. Zionism has been shaped by various factors over the past 150 years, including the Holocaust and Arab-Israeli wars. Many Zionists deny Palestinian nationhood and claim the entire land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. However, others like David Ben-Gurion embraced the UN partition plan in 1947, which led to the first Arab-Israeli war. Israel's policy between 1949 and 1967 aimed for peace and normalization with the Arab world, largely renouncing claims to territories like the West Bank and Gaza Strip. In the 1990s and 2000s, the Oslo peace process saw the two-state solution recognized by many Zionists as the best way forward. As of 2024, over 7 million Jews are living between the Mediterranean and Jordan, and denying their existence or national aspirations could lead to further conflicts. The idea of establishing a single democratic state between the Jordan and Mediterranean is often criticized as an obstacle to securing the rights of both Jews and Palestinians. However, history has shown that such solution can be disastrous, as seen in the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and Iraq. Forcefully imposing a one-state solution on these ethnic groups could lead to civil war, ethnic cleansing, or the establishment of an Islamist dictatorship. Zionism has been open to various ideas to guarantee the individual and collective rights of Jews over the past 150 years, including plans for Jewish national autonomy under the Ottoman Empire. In recent years, Israeli nationalism has become a dominant strain of Zionism, with political parties like Meretz supporting turning Israel from a Jewish state into the state of the Jewish people and of all its citizens. Now, he explains the Netanyahu vision. Israel has been ruled by governments that reject moderate forms of Zionism, with the Netanyahu coalition government embracing a bigoted one-state vision. The coalition believes in the slogan "From the river to the sea," granting full rights only to Jewish citizens, partial rights to a limited number of Palestinian citizens, and no citizenship or rights to millions of oppressed Palestinian subjects. However, the current Israeli government has shown no respect for the individual human rights of Palestinians or their collective national aspirations. Some argue that the Netanyahu coalition's extremism is the inevitable fruit of Zionism, but this is empirically unfounded and politically dangerous. Patriotism is a feeling of love for one's compatriots, while bigotry is a feeling of hate for foreigners and minorities. Failure to separate patriotism from bigotry plays into Netanyahu's hands, suggesting that there is no political alternative to the Netanyahu coalition. If Netanyahu and his political allies cement their hold over Israel, it would spell the end of the historical bond between the Jewish people and ideas of universal justice, human rights, democracy, and humanism. So this is the summary of the article. What's your take on this article by Harari, and what are the main points that you disagree with him, which you wrote a thread about it on X?
I think the fundamental issue with the article is that it's completely divorced from the actual history of Zionism. Harari wants us to believe that in some fantasy world, Zionism could have been a movement that did not see Jews as superior to non-Jews. There's a theoretical world in which that history could have happened. That it's not fundamentally impossible to imagine a world where establishing a Jewish state didn't necessitate treating non-Jews in that state as second-class citizens or as occupied peoples, or subject to different laws and different regulations. But the actual reality of Zionism, as we've seen it over the past 140 years, is very, very different. From the very beginning of the Zionist movement, the settlers moved to Palestine. The Zionist settlers moved to Palestine in the late Ottoman period. And already from 1904 onwards, from the second Aliyah onwards, the mainstream attitude of the Zionist community was this concept called avodah aravit, Hebrew labor. We will only hire other Jews. Now, let me ask you, Kevork, if you say in the United States in the year 2024, I'm only going to hire other whites, guess what? You will be arrested for violating the Civil Rights Act of 1965. That's called racism. Yeah. But 120 years ago, that was just called Zionism. Okay, so that's kind of the origins of the Zionist movement was let's build a Jewish state where we're going to employ only Jews, where we're going to build Jewish factories and Jewish farms to benefit Jews. The Palestinians were simply irrelevant. They simply were not part of the story. They were not incorporated into the Histadrut, the Jewish labor union. They had no place in the Jewish political branch, the executive. They had no role in any of the Jewish institutions, the Jewish schools. They were Jewish-only schools, the Jewish-only healthcare system. The Zionist community was creating a exclusively Jewish society in Palestine. The Arabs simply were irrelevant. It's not even that they were second-class citizens. They just weren't part of the society. They had no place in the state. And so what happened was over the course of 3 decades of immigration, eventually by 1948, the Jews managed to reach about a third of the population of Palestine. And then the Palestinian Arabs were about 2/3. That takes us to the partition plan of 47, which obviously the Jews embraced, because, how do you create a Jewish state, a Jewish democracy in a land that is 66% Palestinian Arab? Well, partition, right? We're going to partition Palestine. So in the Arab part, there'll be 99% Arabs. This is the actual demographics of the partition plan. So in the Arab part, which so Arabs are 2/3 of the country. They're 2/3 of the population of the country. They get 45. They get less than half of the land of British Mandatory Palestine, and they only own and the Arabs own the vast majority of the land. Whereas the Zionists, they get more than half the country. They're only about a third of the population. They only own 6% of the land. In any case, the Jews jump at this offer because, my gosh, the Jews are offered a state. Now, there's a problem, though. Within the borders of this proposed Jewish state, the Arab population is something like 45% of this proposed Jewish state. Well, how do you establish a Jewish state that's 45% Palestinian Arab? So that's a real problem for the Zionists. So during the course of that 1948 war, that the infamously is known as we just had the Nakba Day 2 days ago, right?
Yes.
And then the Israelis celebrate this war as Israeli Independence Day. But basically during the course of that war, Zionist forces expelled by force 750,000 Palestinians from their homes. And the reason was obvious. It's because how do you establish a Jewish state in a land that is at best 45% Arab? But if the Jews take more of Palestine as they wanted to, it would probably be more than half Arab. So
Yes.
there's a fundamental problem here, which is, again, Arabs are not part of Zionism. They have nothing to do with it. They're not. It's not. Remember, there was attempts to establish a Zionist enterprise in Uganda, in Argentina, in Cyprus, in North Sinai. Right? Palestine was just for historical reasons. That is where you could actually convince Jews to go move to. For religious reasons, that is where Jews would actually move to. But obviously, the Arabs were simply not part of the Zionist story. And so when push came to shove, and it was time to actually establish a state, the imperative of the Zionist movement during the war was transfer, was expulsion. So they expelled 40,000 Palestinians from Lid. They expelled tens of thousands of Palestinians from Haifa, from Jaffa. They went to the north, in the south. They expelled Palestinians from Beersheba. They slaughtered hundreds of Palestinians in Deir Yassin, in Tantura, all around Palestine. And then in the north, in the fall, they went up and expelled another 200,000 Palestinians from the Galilee. So this was a war of ethnic cleansing for the Jews, so that they would have a Jewish supermajority in the Jewish state. And then, by the way, in the years after the war, from 1949 to 1956, you had tens of thousands of Palestinians trying to return to their homes. These are refugees trying to go home after a war, as refugees so often do. And guess what happened? The Israeli military adopted a shoot-to-kill policy. Okay? So you're telling me the Zionist movement, which Harari wants me to believe, treats all peoples equal, right? Palestinians and Poles and Ukrainians and Jews. The Zionist movement has no opinion on whether Jews and Palestinians are equal. That same Zionist movement, when it had tens of thousands of defenseless, unarmed, overwhelmingly unarmed refugees trying to return to their homes after the war, that Zionist movement said, "What? Let's shoot them because they're equal to Jews."
You know, what strikes me also, Dr. Zachary, is that many of the Palestinians today, we don't know like the number of it. However, there are many of the Palestinians, their ancestors were Jewish. And through time, through centuries, some of them have converted, some of them have been assimilated into the Arabic communities, some of them still preserve their Semite identity, right? So there is a strong argument that the Zionists are now committing atrocities against the Semites in Palestine, whose grandparents could have been Jewish, right? But also, when I read the article of Harari, I asked myself this question, and I also saw your thread. You said that his arguments are not grounded on evidence, data, or facts, but rather on fiction. Why do you think Harari wrote this article in the first place, when the idea of Zionism is receiving so much global scrutiny now after the Gaza war?
Look, Yuval Harari, owing to his books on human history, Sapiens, Homo Deus, he's become internationally renowned speaker, author, writer, and so he's constantly asked for to express his views on a wide ranging of topics, including topics he's not an expert in, such as Zionism and the history of the Zionist movement. He is a historian, that is correct, but he did his PhD work, and his early historical research is on European medieval military history. His knowledge of Zionism, as far as I can tell, is rooted in the Zionist propaganda that is taught in the Israeli school system. He is not a historian of Zionism. As far as I know, he's never published any original research on Israel or Palestine at all in the 20th or 19th century. So he doesn't know the history. Or maybe he doesn't. He just is choosing to ignore it. But he's being asked to write a piece on Zionism, or maybe he's, asking to write a piece on Zionism. But basically, the ideology he grew up with, the ideology he has always embraced, Zionism, is now coming under attack for obvious reasons, because Zionism has sort of reached its logical conclusion. And what do I mean by that? If you set out with the goal of establishing a Jewish state in a non-Jewish land, and you want to continually bring more Jews in, you want to continually grow and expand and develop, then you're constantly there's an expression in business, which is, show me the incentives and I will show you the outcome. Okay, Show me the incentives, I will show you the outcome. The incentive for the Zionist movement, since its origins in the 1890s all the way to the present, is expulsion, is displacement, is home demolitions, is land confiscations, because it's much, much easier to guarantee Jewish safety and security in a land that has no Arabs.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about that. As long as there are Palestinian Arabs living in Israel and Palestine, Jews will constantly feel insecure because they know that these people are the original inhabitants of the land. They know these people are resisting the movement. They have been resisting it for 140 years. So they're constantly afraid of them. And so in order to rid themselves of that fear, in order to feel safe and secure, which is the whole goal of the movement, they're constantly incentivized to displace Palestinians, destroy their homes, massacre them in their villages. And now, as I said, the logical conclusion, when they really resist, when they really show fierceful resistance to the enterprise, well, what do you do with them?
Yeah.
You commit
And
genocide.
yeah, I think nowadays they feel less secure after the October 7 and the onslaught against the Palestinians in Gaza than they used to be before the October 7 events. Also, Israel lost its deterrence capacity with Iran, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, and state and non-state actors in the region. So they feel there is an existential threat. However, according to Harari, Zionism will most likely survive in this case. I mean, I'm not going to make a forecast for the future, but it seems to me that the resistance against Zionism as an ideology, as an idea in Palestine and around the world is receiving lots of backlash in the United States, in Europe, among the ordinary people. I'm not speaking about the politicians. They are completely detached from their own people, right? Like the simple question is, how can Zionism survive this war after all these atrocities? I personally believe that Israel cannot recover after this onslaught against the Palestinians in Gaza, and the memory will continue living. And in the era of social media, this is not going like all this footage will stay here. There is internet, there is memory, there is evidence for it. Therefore, I truly see that they feel it in Israel, the decision makers, that they are under immense pressure and they are overreacting to prove that they still have this deterrent capacity and they can scare the Palestinians and the Arabic people in the region. But this is not working for them. So how can Zionism survive in such an environment?
Look, I think Zionism today is somewhat of a misnomer. What does it even mean, Zionism today? I think Zionism was a historical movement that led to the establishment of the state of Israel. And then from 1948 onwards, we have something different. We have the state of Israel. And there is an international Zionist movement and there are Zionist congresses, but Zionism achieved its goal. The goal was to establish a Jewish state. That was achieved in 48. Okay, and then it was, let's say, you might say, fine, from 48 to 67, it maybe hadn't completely achieved its goal because its goal was all of Palestine. It had always been all of Palestine, and it settled on the 48 to 67 borders because that was what the state was able to conquer in 48. But make no mistake about it, they were dead set on taking out the rest of Palestine, and there were plans to take the rest of Palestine. So that's exactly what they did in 67. And since 67, the mainstream Jewish Israeli public has been dead set on holding on to all of historic Palestine. There were some attempts to maybe give a bit back, give parts of the West Bank back to Jordan in the late 60s. But it became very clear, certainly by the mid 70s and definitely by the 80s, that the West Bank and Gaza were going to remain a permanent part of Israel forever. That there was no desire to ever give these territories back. In the 1980s, from 1982 to 1988, Israel tripled its settler population. That was a period when it was dramatically expanding its control of the occupied territory. So your question is about Zionism, but basically, I think Zionism is, after 48, is kind of not really relevant anymore. What is relevant is the actions and the beliefs of the leaders of the state of Israel, and those have been very, very clear since 48. It is, this will be a Jewish state. Jews will be privileged within that state. Palestinians will be second-class citizens within that state. From 48 to 66, they are subject to military rule. That is to say, if you're a Palestinian citizen of the state of Israel from 1948 to 1966, if you want to leave your village and visit your brother 2 kilometers away, you need a permit for that.
Yeah, man.
You're subject to a military regime. Okay, and your property was stripped away from you. In 1950, the Israeli government passed the absentee property law and said all of those Palestinian Arabs both the ones that left Palestine, that were expelled from Palestine, and the ones that are still in the state of Israel, if they were internally displaced within the state of Israel. So if I'm a Palestinian from Haifa and I got displaced during the war, I'm still in Israel. But during the 1940 war, I wound up in the north, in the Galilee, let's say in wherever, in Salfit. Let's say Salfit's in the West Bank, but let's say I wound up somewhere in the Galilee. My Haifa apartment would be confiscated. Why? Is that because I'm equal? No, it's because I'm unequal. It's because I'm not Jewish. If I was Jewish, then my property would never have been confiscated from me. So it's the fundamental core principle of the state is if you're Jewish, you have privileges. If you're Palestinians, if you're Palestinian, you can have your property confiscated from you. You're going to be subject to a military occupation or military regime. And then even after 66, Palestinian Arabs are continually subject within the state of Israel to discrimination. Something like 80% of the land of the state of Israel is off limits to Palestinian Arabs. These are the Jewish regional towns and councils, and their admissions committees. If you want to buy property in a kibbutz or in a moshav, or you want to, if you want to move into one of these Jewish rural communities, there's an admissions committee that will reject you if you are Palestinian Arab on the basis of the fact that you are not suitable for life in a rural community. That is the excuse, and that's why 99.7% of the inhabitants of those of the 80% of the land of Israel itself, that's why they're Jewish. 0.3% are Palestinian Arab. That's not a coincidence. That's owing to discrimination at a systematic level, at a state level. So this idea that, is it possible that, Zionism will continue on to the future? Is it possible that Israel will continue to remain a Jewish state for the indefinite future? Yes, of course. Israel's becoming more right-wing, right? Israel has never been as right-wing as it is today, right? We're talking 60% of Jewish Israelis, according to a January 2024 poll, 60% of Jewish Israelis opposed allowing any humanitarian aid into Gaza. 60% of Jewish Israelis believe all 2 million people in the Gaza Strip should die of starvation and dehydration. That is where Jewish society in Israel is at. So you're telling me that's a genocidal society at its core now. That society is going to persist into the future for decades and decades. I doubt that. I think what will happen is that you will have a tremendous amount of international pressure. You'll have sanctions. You will have boycotts. Countries will begin to refuse Israeli travel. Begin to stop recognizing Israeli travel documents. You will have international criminal court cases. Bibi Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, all these people they'll have arrest warrants on their head. They'll never be able to leave Israel again. The ICJ will not say it's a plausible genocide. They will conclude it's a genocide. This is the direction we're headed in.
Wow. Zachary, when I listen to you, I see like you have pain in your chest when you speak about this case, right? And this is the last question. I know that you're coming live with us from an airport. You grew up as a Zionist. This is what I read about you. Could you tell us how did your journey with Zionism start? How it shaped you and your personality? How did you start questioning? Like you have like 3-4 minutes for this.
Sure. So I spent some time in Israel as an undergraduate student, and that exposed me to Palestinian life, Palestinian culture, the Arabic language, and that had a big impact on me. And I wanted to dig deeper. I wanted to learn more. And then I spent a month in the Balkans with a group of half Jews and half Palestinians, a group of American Palestinians telling me, "What you, a Jewish American, you don't speak Hebrew, you have no connection to the land, you have no family there, you've never been there. You can go tomorrow and become a citizen and live in Palestine. Whereas me, a Palestinian American, my parents and grandparents are from there. I have centuries and centuries of history in that country. I have deep connections to it. I want to visit, but I can't. And why can't I? Because I'm Palestinian." And I was like, wow, that makes no sense at all. You're completely right. That's super fucked up. So, that was kind of the beginning, right? And then it's a long process, right? You don't go from the very Zionist environment that I grew up in to becoming an outspoken anti-Zionist overnight. It's a long process. And for me, I would say that process was punctuated and marked by digging deeper into the history. As you can see, I'm a historian, right? I'm telling you about the history. That is for me reading the new historiography, the new Israeli historiography. Benny Morris, Ilan Pape, Simcha Flappen, Avi Shleim, and then obviously all the Palestinian historians, right? Walid Khalidi, Rashid Khalidi, Noura Arakat, all these people, right? And Nur Masalha. Honestly, Nur Masalha's book on basically the idea of transfer and Zionist thinking, that had a profound effect on me. It's a 300-page book basically documenting every single Zionist leader that was like, yep, we're going to have to expel them. And I'm like, oh my God, this ideology is rotten at its core, an ideology that's based on the principle that we will have to expel indigenous inhabitants from their lands in order for us to be able to create a state. That just to my mind suggested that this ideology is really rotten at its core. And then you don't have to just read the history. You can go to Palestine, and you can go to the South Hebron Hills, and you can go to Masaf al-Yatta, where every single day, not every week, but every day, you have Zionists entering the village, harassing Palestinians, destroying their water tanks, destroying their homes, and basically like just bullying them. And you're like, how is this? Like, how is it that my people are supporting this?
Yeah. You know what? I unfortunately cannot go to Palestine. Like, I hold a Syrian passport, and if I want to go to Palestinian territories, then I have to pass through an Israeli airport, and they would not accept my Syrian passport. So I'm not allowed to go to Palestine, basically. And I'm a Christian from Syria, and my grandparents used to go to Palestine, to Bethlehem, and to visit the holy sites in Palestine. And now we're not allowed to do that. Also, one of the reasons why I always speak about this case, because I remember how my grandparents used to go, and they had a tattoo on their arm here on the year and the date when they were in Bethlehem. And we're not allowed to do that anymore. So I speak against the occupation, and it has to come to an end. And I truly believe that the Jewish people and the Muslim people and the Christian people, they can live alongside each other. I mean, the Jews live nowadays in Damascus, in Aleppo, in different parts. It's like my friends text me from Damascus with a kippah on his head, and he says, I feel safer here. It's like, it's crazy. It's crazy, you know. And then you come and tell me that there has to be only one place that we have to expel everyone, and then we have to feel safe in this way. This is not the definition of safety. In the contrary, you're just creating bitter conditions, and this is going to have a backlash against you, and this is going to cause bloodshed. And this is the result of all these policies for decades, unfortunately.
If I could just add one point, which is just to highlight what you just said. If you were a Jew and you were escaping Nazi Germany in the 1930s, and you wound up in, let's say, the United States or Canada or somewhere else abroad, you were much, much more likely to survive and to thrive than if you wound up in Palestine. If you were a Jew in Nazi Germany fleeing persecution and wound up in Palestine, the 1% of the Jewish community of Palestine perished during the 1948 war. 1%. That would have amounted to tens of at any point in American history, had there ever been a single moment or period or year or decade where 1% of American Jews were killed in political violence? I mean, Zionism was endangering Jews from the moment they stepped in Palestine. It is a movement that is all about putting Jews in harm's way. The Gaza envelope, all these towns, by the way, Nahal Oz, which is right on the Gaza border. Guess why they established Nahal Oz in the first decade after the establishment of the state of Israel in 48? The whole point, they established 106 settlements in border areas to act as basically human shields for the state of Israel. That these civilian population centers, like Nahal Oz, like many of those kibbutzim on the border of Gaza, the entire reason they were built in the first place was to act as a first line of defense to the state of Israel. The whole concept of Israel is put civilians on the front line to protect Jews and to protect the Jewish state. So, I couldn't agree with that statement more. And I think we're seeing it today more than ever. Whenever Israel goes on these killing rampages in Gaza, it's Jews abroad that face anti-Semitism. It's Jews abroad that face attacks on their synagogues. It's Jews that suffer. Israel is endangering Jews more so than any other country on planet Earth.
Unfortunately, you're correct. Dr. Zachary, thank you so much for coming on the show live from the airport, guys. The PalestineNexus.com is in the description below. You can just type your email and you receive the newsletters. Also, his X account is in the description below, so make sure to follow him. Thank you so much, Doctor, for being with me. Really.
My pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
And if you come to Berlin, you have a brother here. I would be honored to invite you.
Wonderful. I will let you know about that.
Salam.
Take care.
Guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's live streaming. I appreciate you all. Really, I really enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Zachary Foster, and I really also appreciate that he dedicated his time. He just landed in an airport, and he had to come to the show from the airport. This was really something. First time I host a guest from an airport. Guys, all the relevant links are in the description below. This is going to be the last live streaming for this week. We are Friday 17th. May 17, 2024. The next live streaming is going to be on Monday, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. If you want to support this independent podcast and the interviews that I do with different personalities, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And I will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.